do have 6, and that means we can get started. So we are going to start with Senate Bill 257. We've got Jared Demarinis. Is Jared here?
Yes.
I thought I heard him out there.
Okay, well, let's get Mr. Demarinis in here. State Board of Elections. We're going to start with Senate Bill 257. And here he is, on cue. Okay. So, Mr. Demarinis, you're going to come in here to present Senate Bill 257, and you are the only witness on the bill. Therefore, the floor is yours. Take the time you need. Senate Bill 257.
I apologize. Technology is not working for me. Yes. So, all right, thank you. Sorry. I apologize. Okay. Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections. Thank you for Chair for sponsoring our departmental bill on Senate Bill 257. 257 just does a simple thing. It clarifies when we send out notices to voters who are on the permanent mail-in ballot list to a period beginning 120 days before an election and ending 90 days before the election. The current language is a little bit confusing because it basically talks about the day when the local boards begin to send out ballots to voters and 90 days before the upcoming election. So, bless you. This basically clarifies all that. Additionally, it allows different modes of communication to a voter, so that if, the first is a written notice, but if we are unable to communicate with that voter via that method, that it allows us to just shall attempt to contact the voter using another method, whether it's a phone number that we have or email, so that we will be able to contact them so that they will be able to know that they are on the permanent mail-in ballot list and that a ballot will be coming to them shortly, within 45 days of that. That's all this bill does, and I open for questions and a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Demarinis? Seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 257. Jared, you stay up there. We're going to bring Nikki Tyree up here to join you, and we're going to go to Senate Bill 259.
Excellent. Here. So, so Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections. Again, thank you, Chair, for sponsoring our departmental bill. This one here, this is a consolidation plan for the bill. One, right now we have 3 types of plans that the local boards have to submit to the state board for approval. You have an early voting plan, which is their sites. You have a polling place plan and a drop box plan. Each have different dates when they are due to the state board and come at different times. So in a sense, I was just consolidating all 3 of those plans into one election plan so that now voters as well as candidates know what is going to go on in their county for election purposes. So you'll know all the early voting sites, all the polling places, and the drop boxes in one, consolidated plan. Additionally, I've moved it up from 6 months before due to the state board, 6 months to 7 months. Now, this allows for more public comment from advocates as well as review for the state board to, if there was issues with the plan, that say a site selection or any sort of issues that the board has with the locations of early voting or polling places or even drop boxes, it allows greater time for then the local boards to amend the plan to submit it back for the state board for review without necessarily impeding election administration. Because if there's lawsuits, when we get it at the 6-month, the board would review it, say, at the end of that 6-month period. Now, all of a sudden, you're within 5 months. If there's litigation, then anything else, now you're within 4 months. Things are getting a little bit more problematic for us. Whereas with this extra month, everything it wouldn't affect our normal timeline on that. Additionally, it removes a provision that ties the polling place plan to 2018. This is an outdated year for election administration purposes and polling places. We have undergone a redistricting at this point here, and if we keep moving forward with this, it will be tying it back to something that would almost be two redistricting, 2 censuses eventually ago. So it changes it now that the number of polling places is tied to the first statewide general election held after the most recent redistricting based upon census there. Overall, it's just the other portions of it is just basically reorganizing it and consolidating it into the election plan. So with that, again, I thank you for hearing this, and I welcome any questions and a favorable report.
Okay, let's take, Ms. Tyree, why don't we take your testimony from League of Women Voters? You've signed up favorable with some suggested amendments.
Yeah.
So why don't we'll take your testimony and then we'll take questions.
Of course. So for the record, Nikki Tyree, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Maryland. Good afternoon. Nothing wrong with the bill. We just ask that additional language be added to it. So as local boards take into consideration accessibility for historically disenfranchised communities, we also ask that they take into consideration ongoing practices, events, or other unfavorable activities at considered polling places. This is in direct response to some of the things that we were hearing from advocates on the ground during the general election.
Okay, have you two talked about this amendment?
Yes, that's fine. And I think this also helps when, in the past, this extra month is beneficial as well, because most of the advocates and stakeholders sometimes don't follow the local boards as well as they follow the state board for meetings. And now they'll have the ability to know that an election plan, because we put our notices up there, would be up and having the materials beforehand. So we would get those comments from them with it.
Okay.
So,
okay, we'll take questions. Any questions for either? We'll go to Vice Chair Kagan.
Jared and Nikki, at NCSL's post-con, National Conference of State Legislators post-conference on election stuff, there was an extensive bunch of conversation on planning in advance for crises. The polling place flooded, caught on fire, was shut down. There's a something that's an emergency, and that some of these places had planned in advance, had accommodations written out in their plan. And it seems like this bill would be the right place to consider that. And I wonder if you all have had conversations or musing about that, because I was just about to write NCSL and see if we could get template language from other states, if you'd be open to it.
So I guess we always have disaster recovery sites. I mean, our plans are for that. So it's tough to actually write in sometimes disaster recovery sites. I know that for early voting, the counties usually have an alternate site already planned during some of their stages for that. But for polling places, because it has to be in the precinct, or we don't necessarily know if it's the building that would be flooded, or if it's a power outage in that area there. So it's tough to kind of say, like, this is our backup site, but we do have that, and we do try to communicate as quickly as possible with the voters about that. So if there was any sort of issues with a site that was unable to accommodate voting that day, signs, notices would all go up, and notices. We have another law that requires notice be sent to candidates and to stakeholders that are receiving our notices as quickly as possible about any sort of, I think, changes to polling place locations.
We can talk about this
Yeah.
if you like, but
Yeah, we can-
I think that the current language on page 2, lines 4 through 11, would very easily accommodate, not the specifics, but the concept of
Yeah.
have to do crisis management.
It's
disaster
fine,
planning.
yeah. I mean, we currently have it, it'd be just codifying our current practices that, the locals also have a crisis management or a disaster recovery plan in place for that. So that I would consider a very friendly amendment and, codifying current practices.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
okay, we're going to go to Senator Augustine next.
Thank you. Jared, there was also a request as it related to some of the language around from the Disability Rights Maryland folks. Did you get that? Did you
No.
receive that? They in the definition, they wanted to include the disabilities for the consideration. You know how you consider, you're considering all of the different, like disenfranchised people and the other groups, minority groups that are in the list, and that disability wasn't in the list. I think it was actually in the old language. I saw where disabilities was included, but that now it's not.
I think I was trying to cut and paste it throughout it. I would think that it was for early voting centers there. It was on page 5. The old language is on page 5, lines 19 through 21. And I guess disabilities wasn't mentioned in there. But I can say that every location of polling places are ADA accessible. We already have handicap parking for every location. And if they don't have handicap spots for those polling places, the local boards then put out cones for handicap parking right by the doors of polling places and early voting centers. So, and if the facility themselves is not ADA accessible, then we purchase temporary ramps for those locations to make them ADA compliant for that purpose, during that time period.
Okay, so that's fine, but they're just asking to include the disability in that listing?
So I guess my thing was, as a departmental purpose, that would be a policy change. That would be fine. But I was just trying to reorganize and consolidate the plans based upon current language.
Okay.
So, yeah, but I'll be happy to kind of discuss with it.
Since Senator Augustine has brought it up and we have some testing, could you maybe give us something a little more formal response or comment one way or the other, just so we have something, because, the issue's been raised. I think that would be helpful.
I guess the thing is right now, for taking into account the early voting centers, since we can accommodate or we modify the facilities themselves to be more ADA compliant, I don't necessarily, and that's federal law.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's necessary to be included as a factor in considering that location, because if it meets all these other criterias and it's not ADA accessible, we would make it, like I said, ADA accessible for that purpose.
So, but on page 4, maybe this is something different. Page 4, where it says each local board shall develop a ballot drop box plan, it includes in the listing of the accessibility of the Dropbox ballot, disenfranchised communities, including voters with disabilities.
Yes.
So why is that one different?
That was a policy decision that in that one there, that law included with disabilities, but the early voting ones did not.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I was kind of lost. I was looking for, that's what I was referring to, so like the consistency. So that's, I think they were asking about the consistency, like it's here, but it's not in the others. And so Yeah.
So
Which way do we do it?
So I guess the difference is this, with the drop boxes, because that's where, more for mail slots, so that you don't want a person coming out of it, so you would have, we have the ability for them to kind of, at a certain level, for people with disabilities, so that they're not like reaching up or bending down. Whereas buildings themselves are made, I guess, for ADA accessibility.
Yeah,
So-
I would just suggest that,
But,
I would suggest that, given that we're doing it here for
Yeah.
those very good reasons, and so
Yeah.
if we're going to codify, like, let's just,
I'm happy because it's already in one.
that's all I was
Right,
saying.
exactly.
It's already in the one, why not just make it all the way?
That's fine.
And that would help to address a concern that a group.
Yeah,
gave to
that's
us.
perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any additional questions for either of the two witnesses? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 259. We're going to next move to Senate Bill 262. I'm going to bring, Jared, you could stay up there. I'm also
Yep.
going to bring up Kevin Canali from MACO, who signed up favorable, and then we do have one unfavorable witness. So Kevin, so Jared, why don't you lead off on Senate Bill 262, then we'll go to
Sure.
Mr. Canali.
Sure. Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections, for the record. Again, thank you, Chair, for our departmental bill here. Now, this special election bill, this bill deals with special elections, but it's not adding any special elections or to the current practices. So this is only referring to special elections that are currently in law. Other special election bills are different, and this is about the administrations of a special election. So the first part is just that special elections in the past were mostly a county-run operation, but when you do a vote by mail, the state does it. And so there is now more, I would say, involvement at the state level, and there's more administration and mechanics that are necessary to do a special election, and you cannot do these things in a snap moment here in time. Most notably, we want to make sure that we're complying with UOCAVA for special elections. That's a part of state law, which means that we have to send out ballots 45 days before the election starts. So just that alone now, that's our election day. So anything inside like this little window here gets problematic to us. So we went through the calendar. The quickest that we can turn around from the announcement of a proclamation for a special election would be 90 days because we have to count for that 45-day window. And the other part of this is that if a special election would occur within 120 days of a regularly scheduled election, that we would just want to move that right on to the regular scheduled ballot to save costs for the counties that would be involved in that matter. So that's kind of like the bigger thing here. And then finally, it has enabling legislation for the counties to hold a primary election or not hold a primary election, because I look at it going, if it takes me 90 days now to hold a special election, and then I have to do a general, a vacancy might now theoretically is going to be, for election purposes, 180 days. So that's 6 months. And so if I just wanted to make sure that the counties then had flexibility as to as much as they wanted to do, if they wanted to shorten that window for vacancies for individuals not having representatives on their county council to a 90-day period, that they have that option. It's just enabling the counties then have their choice whether or not to have a primary or not have a primary, and that's completely on them. And then lastly, there is just one provision here that basically, if the county charter and state law conflicts, that basically I have the ability to make sure that the state law is followed over the county charter for any election-related matters.
Okay, here, before we go to MACO testimony, Senator Augustine has light on.
Yes, I do.
So we're going to go to Senator Augustine.
Yes, exactly.
Jared, did you check with either or any of the parties about this?
Well, it passed my board on that.
I said the parties.
Exactly.
Not a board, the parties. I mean, this, you can argue with it for, against, whatever, but we have our parties in our statute. And so
Yes.
we know, you and I have gone
Yes.
through this before with regard to sort of like the autonomy that we provide to parties as it relates to their process for selecting folks to move forward to a general election. So I'm asking, since you would be taking away potentially that, did you talk to all of the parties, the political parties who would be impacted by such a move as this?
No, I did not.
Why?
I just brought it in front of my board. We looked at it as a governance article and the ability to allow the counties the flexibility. It's more the flexibility portion of it. And since my board is made up of both political parties, I guess,
But those are individuals and not the parties themselves. And furthermore, it's also not other parties. They're not all the parties are represented on your board either.
Well, independent, I guess, non-principal political parties
Yeah.
themselves would just go to the general election anyway, because they have a different process. They don't have party primaries. They have nominating conventions or so, but for that purpose is there. So, but yes, I can always go back.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we go to, Mr. Canali, why don't you testify, you sign up favorable on behalf of MACO, so we're going to put you on the clock, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of Senate Bill 262. I think Administrator Demarinis did a great job explaining the bill. From a county government perspective, we would appreciate this flexibility. This could be particularly valuable in deciding whether or not to hold a primary when you have an unexpected vacancy or when a primary is unlikely to yield significant competition. These are costly, they are administratively burdensome, and especially, as Mr. Demarinis highlighted, changes with vote by mail necessitate different timelines. And so with those timelines, we feel like it might be a crunch. So we'd appreciate the flexibility to decide locally whether or not a primary would be necessary. And that flexibility, I think, is important for cost savings and, again, just to align election deadlines and staff time, et cetera. So we understand maybe there will be some further conversations. We're happy to be involved in those, but we'd ask for a favorable report.
Okay, questions, Vice Chair Kagan.
Kevin, you didn't speak about why it's an emergency bill. Could you just address that briefly?
You want to address that?
Oh, sure.
Jared?
For my purposes here, that the 90-day window is important for administrative purposes, and that we may have more special elections later this year as we move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, additional questions? Okay, Senator Washington.
Just so that, I just want to understand about the portion of the bill that has to do with the primary. So currently, who decides if there's always a primary? Is that the case? If there's an election, and so just, yeah, I'd like to better.
Jared, could you get that mic's not on.
Like to.
Okay, there you go.
This is, the idea of not having a primary was actually modeled after when Congressman Wynn resigned. We did not have a primary election for that special election at that time. It went straight to a general election because of the timing of the vacancy, and so we just went right into it. It just had a general and then moved forward with it.
So why don't we take me through, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, take me through just our normal process. So,
Sure.
Every 2 years or every 4 years, we have elections. And then is it always, in this case, in regular elections, is there always a primary?
Yes.
In
right.
every county, there's a primary.
Yes.
Whether there's just one candidate for a party, or if there's no one in the other party running, there's still a primary.
So if
So
you
if,
run unopposed, you would still be appearing on the ballot.
if there's an independent party, not independent, well, whatever, a constitutional party candidate, and that was the only party that had a candidate running, and there was no Democratic candidate, and there was no Republican candidate, would you still run the primary for those? In other words, can the party say we're not having a Democratic primary in this county because we don't have a candidate?
So I think for primary purposes, if there's only one candidate that is, say, for elect one, that candidate still appears on the office and it goes unopposed on that, right? So that is always there because that office will always appear.
Right.
If that person then moves to the general election.
Well, let's just stay in the primary.
Okay, but you were mentioning like the other parties, so I was just like, that was kind of like,
that's
that's the general, so.
The policy change, so I need to understand what's
Sure.
current practice to understand,
Right.
what's happening. So it doesn't matter how many candidates and what their party affiliation is that is participating in the primary that's held in Cecil County, that primary happens. Would that?
Yes, because the primary, a regular scheduled primary would occur, all those offices would appear that would be voted upon.
Right. And so there's no situation in which a county can say, we only have one candidate running, so who has filed or whether, so we don't need to have the primary.
Well, in school board elections, if there is less than the number of candidates for double the number of offices sought, there would be no primary election. Every candidate would go directly to the general election.
But we're not really talking about, is your
But I
bill
mean, but you're
restricted to-
saying like in general, like there is a situation where a primary would not exist, and that would be for school board.
But not any other office. This is
Right,
not
yes,
rhetorical.
right, no, but I
really
just,
don't know
right,
the answer
exactly,
to these
but not,
questions.
right, I just,
Okay, all right. So is this bill saying in the instance of a special election only, or do you want to have discretion? Is it opening up discretion for all primaries?
no, just for special.
Okay.
Because of the amount of time for the vacancy.
Okay. And so what happens now, just through the process, again, there's a vacancy,
Right.
and is there a cutoff? Where's the cutoff when there has to be a primary?
That's depending on the county charter. So the counties decide when a vacancy is appointed or if it goes to a special election.
For all positions or just their county positions?
County.
County.
Just county positions?
Right.
So this bill is only addressing county positions and not any other positions?
Right.
Okay, so county governments, so right now, what authority do county governments have
Only
to set elections?
only county, charter.
Charter counties.
Yeah.
Okay, so charter counties can decide when the elections are? in
Right.
for their county?
They're special elections.
There's-
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we'll need, I don't want to keep going. I want to just make sure I understand and the public and we all understand what authorities, because generally the authority to vote is with the states, and of course, that is then additional authorities are then given to locals, right? So I guess I'm wondering, do counties have authority to set elections when they occur outside of any authority that is given to them by the state?
So
I would say all of our authority is given by the state.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to go back to Senator Augustine.
Thank you. I won't belabor the point, but clearly the charter counties do have, within their charter, would you agree that that's what dictates the election process the process for their members, and it's built into the charter?
I'd say yes. So for special elections, yes.
Okay. I also just wanted to just for a matter of clarification, Jared, you referenced the win where we did not have it, but wasn't it the case that we had literally just had a primary and then Congressman Wynn resigned after losing a primary, which is the reason why there was really no real reason to then have another primary? We literally just had it. Wasn't that what happened?
Well, yes, I mean, but
So I would just suggest that using that as an example, like that was a case where we actually did have the primary and then he resigned before the end of his term, and so that such that, you know, he was my congressperson, that we would have someone in Congress since he resigned instead of waiting till the end of his term. We had just had a primary election and just had an election of our next person. So there would really be no, we literally just had the primary.
Well, I guess I was just trying to use that as an example that you didn't have to have a primary because of just because it was finishing out a term of office. It triggered a special
Right, I just want to
election.
make sure
Right,
colleagues
yeah, exactly. I wasn't
understood that
trying.
it wasn't a situation where there was no primary. There actually was. It was just literally, it made no sense to have another one literally, you know, 2 or 3 weeks later. That's all. I just wanted to make it
Yes,
clear.
exactly. So I didn't mean to try to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, folks don't know
Right.
our local politics.
Exactly, but I just, right, exactly. But,
Yeah.
but I guess the bigger point of this is that the special election is important and that I really do need the 90-day window for other
Understood.
portions.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, additional questions for either of the witnesses? Okay, seeing none, we do have some unfavorable testimony, so why don't you guys yield the table to Alan Lang. Mr. Lang, why don't you come up? You're signed up unfavorable. And again, you'll be on the 2.5-minute clock, so tell us why this is a bad bill.
Mr. Chair and fellow senators, I guess my one concern was about the fact that for a county council or a county executive special election, that they could declare it a nonpartisan election and not have Republican or Democrat beside it. And I thought that might cause confusion for the voters. My other concern had been that they would not have to send out a specimen ballot. But I heard from the panel here that the ballots would go out 45 days in advance. I now see why you wouldn't really need a specimen ballot, and there would be enough time. So my only concern is that having the ability to declare it a nonpartisan special election and not list the political parties of those who are running. And so that's my only concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh, wait, we've got to wait to see if there are any questions. You can't run away quite yet.
I've never had any before.
Vice Chair Kagan does have a question.
I have a statement. Mr. Lang, you submit testimony a lot, but we don't often see you here in person. So thank you for your civic activism, and we appreciate hearing your opinions.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, that concludes Bill here on Senate Bill 262, and we're going to next move to Senate Bill 267. Mr. Marinus, why don't you come up here to present Senate Bill 267?
Yes. Yes. Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections. This is my fourth and final departmental bill here. We did a lot here. This one is not going to be as controversial as the other one. I assure you of that.
Don't say that, Mr. Lang.
Exactly.
Mr. Lang has signed up unfavorable, just so you know.
Of course, that's all right. But you can't please everyone. But this one here basically does two things. One, it moves up when a new party petition has to file its petitions with the state board for processing from August, the first Monday in August to the first Monday in July. The reason for this is twofold. One, the first Monday in August, the locals get slammed with candidate petitions that time, also charter petitions, and so this is just moving for administrative purposes up 30 days for us so that we can kind of lessen the load for the August deadline. The second is that when you're a new party petition, right, candidates have to file a declaration of intent at that time there. And then on the first Monday in August, they have to then file a certificate of candidacy with nominating papers. If you're a new party petition, filing your petition and being a candidate that wants to be nominated by that new party, everything is now being postponed for 20 days while that's going on, and the candidate wouldn't necessarily know if they are or are not going to appear on the ballot. And also, the other candidates would not necessarily know if this candidate would appear on the ballot. So by moving the new party petition up the 30 days to the first Monday in July, by the time the first Monday in August comes around, that party petition will have been processed, because we have to process those things in 20 days, so that everyone would know whether or not this party was certified for the ballot. And then therefore, then they can make their nominations to their candidates for the first Monday in August to appear. So then, basically by the first Monday in August, everyone will kind of know who everyone is going to appear on the ballot. Finally, the last part of it is that once we've made an official determination on a submission of a petition, you cannot reuse signatures if that, say, the petition fails. So they couldn't come back and say, I've submitted this on the first Monday in July for a petition, and then it fails, but then say, all right, give me back all the good ones, see if they still within the 2-year period, and then I'm going to just basically supplement that. No. Once you submit a petition, you're supposed to rise and fall by that submission, and then move forward. So this basically goes, it kind of clarifies that, so that you can't just kind of keep on bringing back or having us to say, just give us the good ones back, and then we'll just keep on resubmitting until we hit that 10,000 threshold. So this kind of is just making sure that, you have to then go forth, like once you hit that 10,000 or submit it, if you fail, you're going to have to go and get a whole new 10,000. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, questions?
Again, looking for a favorable report. So thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Demarinis? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Jared. We do have a favorable with amendment testimony virtually. Andy Ellis, I did see him in the queue a little earlier. Is he still here? Okay, Mr. Ellis, you hear me? Okay, you're going to have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. There you go. Okay, so you're on the 2.5-minute clock. Signed up favorable with amendments. Okay.
Excellent, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Andy Ellis. I'm representing the Maryland Green Party today. And the Maryland Green Party has submitted 7 such petitions through the new party petition process, probably more than any party in Maryland. I did submit written testimony that goes into more detail here. We agree with the part of this that moves the submission deadline back a month. We went through some of those snafus that Jared was talking about this year. And the last Friday in July, we had some anxious moments about the first Monday in August. So we totally agree with that part of it. We think that the second part of this is not the best way to necessarily solve a problem that is created by having a lot of petitions coming in at the last minute. And we would suggest instead that instead of removing the second submission, that this bill be supplemented with what is currently Delegate Root's HB 642, which would allow electronic signature verification as was used during the COVID pandemic, and also increase some of the standards for verification. The concern that we have is that if you remove the second submission, parties like ours are going to be incentivized to turn in more petitions on that first Monday in July, because if we don't have the second submission as an opportunity to be able to have a release valve, where now we would turn in 17,000 in order to get 10,000 valid, because we know about 30% get invalidated, we would estimate for turning in 25,000 to maybe 30,000 even, and we would bring them in like a wheelbarrow like the RFK folks did this year. We think that that puts an unnecessary burden on the local and state boards, especially for the small number of new party petitions that come in. So what we would suggest instead is to remove the thing that takes away the second submission and to add the provisions from Delegate Root's HB 642 that has been heard before this committee in 2024 as SB 29, so that new parties would have the ability to use the electronic submission process that we developed during COVID, and would have the verification standards that are in that bill. So We generally support this, and we generally want to decrease the burden on election workers having to count all these signatures. But we think that this potentially has unintended consequences of increasing the amount of signatures they would have to count and verify in a short period of time. And we think there's a better solution that has been offered before this committee in the past.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ellis. Any questions for Mr. Ellis? Okay, seeing none, thank you, sir. We do have Mr. Lang, you want to come back up here? You signed up unfavorable. Again, we're on Senate Bill 267.
Mr. Chair, fellow senators, I'm Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. I support the first part, and I had a concern about the second part in that if I know with some with petitions turn in their petitions early, and as I read the law that in Title VI, Subtitle 2, it allows additional signatures to be added to a petition if the petition is rejected before the deadline by filing amended information pages with additional signatures. And I was concerned that this process would no longer be allowed by the process just described. He mostly described people turning it in on the last day, but the law allows you, if you turn it in early, and they reject some of your signatures, then you can go back and get additional signatures and keep the ones that were accepted. And I was concerned that that process would not be continued. So that's my concern.
Okay, well, thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Lang? Okay, thank you, sir. That concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 267. I did see Senator Lamb was in, and then he went out in the hallway with his phone. Could somebody maybe take a look if Senator Lamb's? Senator Lamb, you good? Ready to go to? We're going to next move to Senate Bill 171. Senator Lamb, I don't think you've designated any panelists. We do have several witnesses who've signed up, but the floor is yours on Senate Bill 171, and then after you, I'll call some of the other folks up who've signed up. Okay.
All right, sounds good. Yes, there are no other panelists. This is a bill that you've heard before, so I figure I would just summarize the bill for you again. Thank you, Chair Feldman, members of the committee, here to present to you Senate Bill 171. For the record, Clarence Lamb, Senator District 12, and did not bring anyone else just to help keep this brief. As many of you know, I have long supported special elections to fill vacancies in the General Assembly. The Senate has passed this bill that we're considering 4 times. The Senate has passed the bill on special elections 4 times, but the House committee hasn't brought it forward to a vote. And although I still believe we need to figure out a way to include special elections in the vacancy process, I also believe that in the meantime, we should ensure that the current process is as transparent as possible. Additionally, any special elections bill will likely include temporary appointments, and we should ensure that those appointments are transparent. I also want to note that for this bill and my push for special elections are not in any way related to specific appointments that have occurred, but rather an effort to ensure that our constituents can be confident in the transparency of filling General Assembly vacancies in the state. As everyone knows, the General Assembly vacancies are filled via a 2-step process. First, the Central Committee representing the party and the district of the former member makes a replacement recommendation to the governor, and then the governor appoints that individual. This bill requires Central Committees to use some common sense transparency measures to help ensure that the public can be fully confident in their process and also generates uniformity across the board. Under the bill, Central Committees will be required to publicly post a solicitation for 7 days to let everyone know that there's a vacancy, publicly post applications for the vacancy so that everyone can see the applications that have been put forward, publicly interview each of the applicants, and also hold a public vote. Finally, Central Committee members who are interested in filling the vacancy will have to recuse themselves from a vote. Currently, Central Committee members who are lobbyists or judges are not permitted to vote on appointments. Limiting Central Committees from voting for themselves will similarly ensure that individuals who have a vested interest aren't the deciding outcome of that vote itself. Although some local central committees do already use processes that are similar to what's called for in this bill, this will ensure that there's a standard minimum level of transparency across the board for how all central committees operate across the state, because this is a very important responsibility, probably the most important responsibility that our central committees have, are the appointments to this body to serve in these roles. I know that the vice chair is a special elections bill this year, but I think it's, which I credit her on and taking up the baton on this really important issue that we've been working on. But I also think it's hard to predict what the House will do with any special elections bill. In the past, as has been passed forward by this body, by the Senate, multiple years, that bill has been held up in the House. So if the committee passes the vice chair's bill, my suggestion would be to send this bill over to the House as well, so that if the House doesn't act on special elections, which I hope it does, we can still move this process forward. And additionally, as I mentioned at the top, in instances where that special elections bill doesn't apply and the Central Committee is still appointing interim legislators to serve in these roles, these provisions are still going to be important for any Central Committee going through the process to fill vacancies as they occur. Also respectfully submitting an amendment request with some final modifications to further build public trust in central committees and also in the appointment process. This amendment requires any central committee vote to fill a vacancy be taken by signed ballots. These would be written ballots, not a roll call, and that the vote results by member be publicly disclosed. So the final vote tally has to be publicly disclosed. It also places the work related to filling a vacancy in the General Assembly under the jurisdiction of the Open Meetings Act, because currently they're not required to abide by the Open Meetings Act. Most, I think, do, but they're not required to. And finally, there will be an amendment to limit members of the Central Committee from serving on in other elected roles. So although I hope the state will eventually pass a special elections bill in the General Assembly for the broader issue of these vacancies, this bill will help ensure that the current process is transparent to the public, and appreciate the consideration of this bill and ask for a favorable report.
Okay, we'll be hearing that other special elections bill in 2 bills from now. So, okay, we're going to take questions for Senator Lamb before we take any additional witnesses. We're going to take Senator Watson to start.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. You and I spoke about this. What page of the bill is that last provision you talked about where someone can't hold 2 elected positions at one time?
It's in the amendments. We talked about that recently.
Okay. It's in the amendments. Got it.
I think we're still waiting on the amendments yet, but I described the amendments to you, but we'll get those to the committee.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, additional questions for the sponsor, Senator Lamb? Okay, seeing none, thank you, sir.
All right,
We're going to go to, we've got 3 live in-person witnesses, 1 virtual. So Lisa Smith, why don't you come up, sign favorable. Philip Beninati and Iman Donovan are both also, are they here? Do we have our additional witnesses? Again, Philip Beninati and or Iman Donovan. Come on up. Okay, you 2 are going to be on the 2.5-minute clock. And Lisa, why don't you start? You're signed in favorable, again, on Senate Bill 171. 2.5 minutes.
Good afternoon. This is my 3rd year on the same subject. For the record, the name is Lisa Smith. I am a member of Montgomery County Democrat Central Committee, represent District 14. We do have these different rules as part of Montgomery County. We make sure that when we cast a vote, it's open to the public. We do make announcements, but I do know that other central committees do not have these policy. I know their meetings are not open like ours. And so that's why I support this bill, that it allows transparency, accountability, and fairness. And at the end of the day, we represent the people, and they should know what's going on as far as who we're appointing and why. One of the provisions that I like the most is the fact that we're asking Central Committee members to recuse themselves if they choose to be part of the process. And that's a small ask, because at the end of the day, the person who's sitting next to you can't vote for themselves. So that is one of the reasons why I support it. I did submit a written testimony I ask for a favorable vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sir, what's your name?
Eamon Donovan.
Okay, Ms. Donovan, 2.5 minutes. And you're signed up actually favorable with amendments, so.
I am, actually, because I'm here on both 171 and on 2, since
So we're
they're
just, right now, we're just on 171.
Okay.
Okay, we'll take up the other one.
All right, so let's get to 171 then. I'm here on behalf of the Forward Party and our thousands of members here in Maryland. We've been growing by leaps and bounds since the last election. People frustrated with the current system. And one of the things that we hear constantly from our members is that we need to reform democracy. We need to renovate democracy or we're going to lose it. And more democracy is better for us, I believe, as a society. We should trust the voters. We should hold the special elections. I personally was at a meeting where they selected a brand new delegate last Saturday, and the chaotic structure of everything, the lack of public support, the lack of the public even bothering to show up was really discouraging. And we just hope that 171 as SB 171 as a stopgap measure if we can't get special elections is probably the best that we can do. If that is the best that we can do this session, then we support that.
Okay, although I mentioned you signed up favorable with amendments, did you have an amendment that you were proffering or
No,
not?
I apologize. I'm,
Okay.
let's say favorable if everything else fails that we want.
Okay, I got you. Okay, any questions for our two witnesses? Okay, and our virtual witness is not in the queue, so that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 171. Thank you, Senator Lamb, and thank you to the witnesses. We're going to take a one witness bill from Senator Simonaire before we move to the vice chair's package. So we're going to take up Senate Bill 276 from Senator Simonaire, and Senator Simonaire, you are the only witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Senator Brian Simonaire, Senate Bill 276, one-person panel by design. You can look at the written testimony and see the favorable support. I also want to mention we are working with the department and also the governor. We will be bringing some amendments shortly. But I also want to let you know, over the interim, I worked with MSDE, MHEC, USM, MABE, and other stakeholders to bring this consensus legislation before you. As you'll recall, we talked about Senate Bill 275, which defined the definitions, which completely restructured it and established consistent and equal benefits to all 8 branches of uniformed services. And this is part of that package. So specifically to this bill, it deals with the education article in 4 main categories. One is definitions. Another one is state and local boards, where it talks about deployment and transferring into the states and how we consider that for all 8 branches. Higher education with guidelines, policy, course registration priority, higher education commission dealing with service obligations, scholarships, and other things. I could go into much greater detail if you have any questions, but I will leave it at that and your ability to read testimony.
Okay.
And ask for your favorable consideration.
Any questions for Senator Simonaire on Senate Bill 276? Seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 276.
Thank you.
And next, turn to the vice chair for a bill entitled Special Elections to Fill Vacancies in Office. And so we have, this is a piece of legislation we have seen in this committee previously. Senator Kagan, I've got Joanne Antoine from Common Cause Maryland as one of your panelists. I've got Nikki Tyree from League of Women Voters. Those are two designated panelists. Is that accurate?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Thank you. I see Jason Spiegel, but I wonder if Jason was here for the prior bill.
No, he signed up for this bill virtually, so
Okay,
we're gonna,
great.
we'll pick him up on the virtual side.
All right. So, Mr. Chair, for the record, Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Because we have passed this bill already, as well as the next one, I'm going to be pretty abbreviated out of respect for your time. So we all know that we have a lot of people who have been appointed rather than elected by the voters. The voters believe that their voice should matter. And so this is a compromise bill, which is the version that we passed last year, which would have just the vacancies created in the earliest portion of a new term that would then allow the voters to cast their ballot to fill a seat on the presidential election ballot. So there will be no additional cost for the local boards of elections. It would just be smoothly just adding that vacancy in. And I just want to be clear, we have some great appointed members, including one on our own committee lately, Senator Tarr, and we've just brought Senator Jackson over. So this is no reflection, obviously, to them, and neither of them would be covered by this bill because it really is just for the earliest part. And we saw in the Hogan administration and then in the Moore Miller administration how they picked out several legislators, incumbent legislators, to bring them into their cabinet or into their senior staff positions. And so we just think that the voters ought to be able to fill those for the balance of the 4 years. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to these wonderful supporters.
Okay, why don't we take the two panelists, then we'll take questions. Tell us who you are, and you're going to be on the 2.5-minute clock, okay?
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. My name is Morgan Drayton, here on behalf of Common Cause Maryland, in lieu of Joanne Antoine, who's sick today. Thank you to Senator Kagan for again bringing this legislation. And as she said, this bill has passed the committee and chamber multiple times, so I will keep my comments short. Common Cause has spent a great deal of time working on this issue, and I just want to state for the record again that this is not about any individual appointee. It's about the voters in these districts whose voices are not being heard in this current process of how we fill our legislative vacancies. And in this political climate where Marylanders are concerned about the actions at the federal level, it's even more critical that the General Assembly double down on its commitment to not only protect but move towards a truly inclusive democracy here in the state. That means working to ensure voters always have a say in who represents them and their interests. And for those reasons, we would urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Feldman. Again, Nikki Tyree, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Maryland. And thank you, Senator Kagan, for being so steadfast with this legislation. This bill has already passed the Senate 3 times, so there's not much more to appeal to you guys. But what we would ask is that you take into account that more and more voters are becoming apathetic to what they're seeing, not only at federal government, but also state and local government. Special elections, constantly having people be appointed, just adds to that. It is making voters not want to turn out. We can see that in midterm elections in the abysmal numbers that Maryland carries. Montgomery County currently has 41% of its legislators, respectfully, appointed. And we just think that this is not passing special elections is the best way to lock voters out of the democratic process. That's all to say that the Senate, again, has passed this 3 times. So what we will ask is that you please speak to your counterparts in the House. Please urge them to get this out of the committee and move it onto the floor and then vote yes. All of you have 1 to 3 people. Please speak to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got Senator Attar with the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like I have to ask a question because I was called out, but it's more of a comment, so I'm going to put in a question. I co-sponsored this bill in the House last year, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make it clear that this is a constitutional amendment. This would be on the ballot for the voters next year. Often, the General Assembly does not pass constitutional amendments in the odd years. We wait until election years, but I'm going to encourage us to move forward. We've got some momentum. There is a real sense that we've got to get this done. So I'm going to encourage us, hopefully, Mr. Chair and colleagues, that we're going to be able to do this year and then kind of put it away and we won't have to think about it.
Although I would note, I was texted to remind me that the abortion bill we passed in 2023 went on the ballot in 2024, so that's not a foolproof policy. Okay, that said, additional questions for panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you. I'm going to call up some of the other in-person favorables before we go to Mr. Spiegel virtually. Okay, I'll call again. I think he's not here. Mr. Philip Beninati from the Maryland Forward Party. I don't think he was here for the earlier bill. Lisa Smith, come on up, Lisa. Paula Bienefeld, is Paula here? Okay, and Mr. Donovan, you were here earlier. Why don't you come up? You signed up favorable on this one, too. And then we'll pick up our one virtual witness, and then we have Mr. Lang signed up unfavorable. So, okay. Lisa Smith, why don't you start in your 2.5 minutes? You're signed up straight favorable.
Hi, again, Lisa Smith, Montgomery County Democrat Central Committee. I'm so sorry. Again, for the third year, this has nothing to do with those who I have participating in appointing and who have been appointed. But since this is the 5th day of Black History Month, I'm going to share some personal history with you all. My parents, family members, did not have an opportunity. I was born and raised in Virginia. My parents were from North Carolina, moved up to Virginia for a better life. My father, sharecropper, my mother, domestic worker. Voting was a key thing for them. They didn't have an opportunity to really fulfill that 14th Amendment where citizens are allowed to vote because there were always these little traps. You know, you had to pass a reading test. You had to pay your poll tax. It was always these things preventing them from not voting. So when I was growing up, voting was a key thing, was a very important thing. On January 4th, just recently, the people of Virginia were allowed to do something that the people of Maryland was not able to do that exact same day. They were allowed to cast a vote for the person who would represent them as state delegate. In the process of Maryland was appointing during that same day, same time. And I get this question all the time, and I have no answer. Why? Why can't we do the exact same thing that they do in Virginia? In spite of all the issues they had in Virginia in the past, they are allowed to do something that we in Maryland can't do. So again, for another year, I'm just asking to do your best to get this past that hurdle, to give the people of Maryland an opportunity to vote for the person who represents them, as opposed to this whole appointment process that I may say I participate in. I do the appointment, and I don't like it because I know I'm taking that vote away from someone. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Donovan, put the mic.
Oh.
Put the mic there. You're 2.5 minutes. Sign up favorable.
Yeah, I'll make this one pretty short. We are strongly
Really
behind.
close to the mic, if you would.
We are strongly behind this one because we just trust the voters, and we believe that when it comes down to it, that's what we should do. It shouldn't be 6 members of the public in a junior high school gym, and they're sitting there for 5 hours interviewing candidates that they don't even get to vote on. It's not a good system, and we have the power. You have the power, senators, to fix this. And why not this session?
Okay. Any questions for the 2 witnesses, Senator Watson?
Thank you. I think the terms you use are very overloaded. So a voter can vote for me, but a voter can't vote for what I'm going to vote for. And so this bill actually takes some of the authority away from our central committees because they are elected to fill vacancies by party. And they're elected by the voters. Nobody knows the district more than those members, than the sitting senators, than the sitting delegates. We have the nuances that the general public does not have. And the ability to put someone in there to fill out a term, I think helps us get balls across a line many times. So I'd just like you to, just give me a little more of why I should be leaning your way, because I don't see it.
I agree with you 100%. We do know our community, and I'm telling you, my community is saying enough is enough. 85% of the people in Maryland are saying enough is enough. And we got to listen to these people. We have to. They want to be able to go and cast a vote for the person who represents them. That's a fundamental right. Most people want that. And I get it. When someone elected me, 3 years ago, They didn't realize I will be making this appointment. Most people don't realize that. When I voted for years ago, someone who on Central Committee, I did not know this is what happened until someone told me 3 years ago, this is what takes place. A lot of people don't know. So I hear you. I truly hear you. And we do know our people. And I'm saying to you that they had enough. They want to be able to cast a vote for the person who represents them.
If I could add on briefly, party central committees, as their primary roles, used to be about electing candidates, covering the polls, helping raise money, recruiting precinct chairs. And it was the nuts and bolts of making sure that their party was successful in the primary, not generally, but in the general election. And as there have been all these vacancies, this small part of their job has become enormous, and it has become very political. And they have made some great choices, but there's not the same transparency, accountability, opportunity for the voters to get to know the choices and be able to make their decision themselves.
Counter to the bill we just heard that Senator Lamb is talking about, the transparency. He said everything that you just said. And if we follow his process, the voters would understand, know who made the vote, why they made the vote. They would clearly be able to understand and listen to all the testimony of why I should do this, where I come from, and all of those things. So I'm still not sold on it.
So I'm not to debate it with you too much, but we can also talk offline, and you know the bill because we've had it before us. Transparency is something that Montgomery County, but not every central committee does. So voters can watch at home, the press can watch at home, but they don't get to speak their own truth. They don't get to have their own voice. And whether it's 6 people or so, 5, 6 people in a district, or at large 26 people in countywide, and there are 3 or so, 4 from District 17, and they're picking for someone from District 14. They're not necessarily going to be the experts.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Just,
we can talk more.
I do just one historical context. So a version of this bill, I actually introduced a version of this bill with Delegate David Moon back in 2016, and the bill went nowhere because every central committee in the entire state of Maryland came in to testify in opposition, actually to Senator Watson's point, because it was taking. I'll just note, we don't have any testimony from any central committee in the entire state of Maryland. I mean, it's a sea change from, I don't know, do you see something? From 2016, where that was the death knell for the bill, now I don't see anything in the bill fold. So it's just a little bit, just kind of a little historical context from my own experience. Okay, with that said, additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, we're going to next go to our unfavorable witness. We've got Jason Spiegel. No, is he on the? He's favorable. I apologize. Virtual, and then we're going to go, Mr. Lang, to you. Okay, Mr. Spiegel, we're going to pull you up, and I know you are a constituent of the vice chair,
right,
and part of our Democratic Party apparatus. And Mr. Spiegel, you got 2.5 minutes, and you're signed up favorable.
Thank you, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. Jason Spiegel. Although I'm a member of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, I'm testifying in my personal capacity and urge a favorable report on SB 02. As a member of the Central Committee, I participated in the process of selecting the replacements for departing legislators. While the Central Committee selected outstanding public servants to fill these vacancies, our democratic ideals dictate that replacement of the appointment system with short-term appointments and elections be implemented. SB 2 would continue the benefits of the appointment process, lower cost and a pathway to elective office for traditionally disadvantaged communities, while also making that process more participatory and inclusive. Because, as Senator Kagan mentioned, only a fraction of the Central Committee's membership live in any given district, appointments by the Central Committee give greater votes to individuals who do not live in the district and may not be familiar with it. Empowering the district voters to fill vacancies will not only provide greater voice to district residents, it will also restore public confidence in the process of filling vacancies. As a resident of District 17, I am not allowed to vote in the primary or general election for a delegate or senator from District 20, but yet as a member of the Central Committee, I am authorized to vote and don't have necessarily the knowledge, and certainly less than the knowledge that a district resident has. I would also echo that this bill would amend the Maryland Constitution. If enacted by the General Assembly, reform of the appointment process would be put before the voters in the 2026 ballot. That puts the matter where it belongs, in the hands of the voters to decide how they want vacancies to be filled by election or Central Committee appointment. I want to thank my senator, Senator Kagan, for her leadership on this issue and urge the committee to favorably report SB 2.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Spiegel? We've got Senator Augustine.
That's not for Mr. Spiegel, but I can be
For the witnesses? Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Come on.
I've done my very best to stay silent, but I just can't anymore. I'm sorry. First of all, just on our process, Madam Vice Chair, we did make the important and right decision to enshrine reproductive rights in an off year, but that was really in response to the Dobbs decision. Would you agree?
Yes, and
Okay, and so are you suggesting
passion.
that this rises to the level of like the Dobbs decision, that this matter rises to that level?
I think it was.
I'm just asking.
I'm not sure that every bill and every ballot measure is equivalent and that the passion level is not the same, but I think we've all seen public opinion polls, and overwhelmingly voters want to elect their legislators rather than have them selected.
Okay, but I understand that part, but that wasn't what I was asking. I was asking about our process and what we do and why we made that decision, which was referenced. It's the only reason why I brought it up is because it was referenced. If it hadn't been referenced, I wouldn't bring up. That was a very significant ruling, and so we needed to and must and did act in that, even though we knew that it meant that it could get stale. We knew it wasn't going to get stale, but that it could because it was an additional session before we actually could have been right to it. So and that's been our normal process. Would you agree that it's been the process to do it?
I can't speak to all throughout history. I suspect that it has also been done off years. And I think very few things had the passion and the fervor of the Dobbs decision, so I totally grant you that. Yeah. But this is pretty important. It's about democracy, which is being threatened right now in Washington. Okay. And so us joining 28 other states in having some version of special elections.
And I don't mean to belabor the point because we did already vote on this and everything, but there's a couple things I just wanted to also just kind of get out there.
Understood.
The other thing is that we've heard just really this, again, it was mentioned by the chair about not hearing from the other central committees. As someone who was on this central committee in Prince George's County and was a part of this process, we are hearing significantly from Montgomery County. Have we heard from all the other central committees across the state about where they are on this?
Senator, everybody knows about this bill. It's gotten a lot of press.
I just asked a question, Senator.
I think Central Committee members from any of the 24 jurisdictions could have signed up in favor or opposed.
Because it feels like, I just, again, to some degree, we're getting this process from, which, by the way, a central committee can establish in their own bylaws. Again, having been on the central committee, you can determine how you choose, as was mentioned, how you choose to work within the statute to create the kinds of things that were discussed as far as that. And so the idea of besmirching some of the other folks, I mean, is that the right thing to do?
May I suggest also, Senator, that no other central committee other than Montgomery County came in against this bill either. So it's both.
Well, I asked you if you asked them, though. Since it was raised that they didn't do that.
Yeah, but not my job, and I can't speak to Delegate Foley's outreach.
Okay.
We're going to go to Senator Washington next.
Thank you. I guess I wasn't aware of the practice of not doing a constitutional amendment during an election. So I was just curious, you know, is it in law anyway? I mean, I again, not to, because I just wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me, just my understanding is that if we pass a bill in a session and it requires a constitutional amendment, that it just is, if there's enough time, it just goes on the ballot the next time we vote. Is that the...
You make a great point. So one of the best analogies, I think, in the House, and many of us did serve in the House, there was something called the second reader rule. And it's not in the rule book.
Right.
There's no such thing. And yet everybody kind of knows about the second reader rule, and lots of people violate it. So there is a custom, there's not a rule, there's not a practice, there's not a dictate or a mandate, but often we do wait for the even years. But
Right.
we don't have to.
But just again, even with these, because I, you know, I was in the House and was their second reader rule or custom, but as an individual elected official, if I felt called to oppose or not vote for something, that's what I did.
100%.
So that's just so I'm just saying that regardless of custom, I'm just wondering, you know, if like, in other words, for me, whether or not it's custom or not custom, and I'm asking, would you agree, to evaluate whether or not we pass this bill isn't based on custom. It's based on if we think it's based on if I think it's the appropriate policy to put before the full Senate.
I agree.
Okay.
That's why I brought it.
Just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Just
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Senator Washington.
Look, let me just say, this is a legitimate issue, the timing topic. We got the merits of the bill and then the topic that's come up here and, you know, and a legitimate discussion about this could be passed in 2020. So I think that's a discussion we could have. And by the way, the House will have the same discussion. I guess, you know, if they were to move the bill first and send it over to us, we will have to explain why they thought it was okay. You know, so this is still going to percolate. I'll just put it out there. These are absolutely legitimate issues. Okay, additional questions for our panel? Well, I did have, Vice Chair, you may have the answer to this, because we're referenced about central committees and a lot of people on the central committee who are not from the districts, but that's not uniform. Like, I do think we have central committees where only the folks from that legislative
True.
district select. So
That's why I
yeah,
referenced
that
it,
was
and-
what Sarah Augustine was referring
Yes,
to. Okay,
our
so we don't.
friends in
I
the
just
city
want to
and-
clarify my own mind about that fact. Okay, yeah, sure, Senator Washington.
Not to detract, but just generally quick curiosity about, is this, you know, we heard sort of like a local-ish bill yesterday in our committee. Would delegations have authority to do this, or is the only way for this to happen is through the state as
No, this is a constitutional issue. This isn't our
So
state
that's what I'm saying.
constitution.
So
Right.
this is the only way
Correct.
to resolve this. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, additional questions? Okay, thank you to everybody for testifying. We do have
Thank you.
Mr. Lang. You've signed up, Mr. Lang, you've signed up unfavorable. You're going to come back up here and give us your testimony about why this bill should not proceed forward, okay? I have to do it in 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes.
I'll go over here then, so I don't accidentally break your glasses. Mr. Chair, fellow senators, my name is Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. I'd like to have an unfavorable decision or a report about this bill. Currently, we know there's an appointment process, and I wanted to say that we just had one in Anne Arundel County in District 31. That went really well. From what I understood of the process, it would have matched almost everything that was in Senate Bill 171 for, you know, they publicized it, they had hearings, people came, and the Central Committee, I believe that the Central Committee were elected by the Republican members or the Democrat members of the respective county, and this has been a long process. I I don't think it's broken. I think it's worked for decades. I believe some of the arguments could be made just the other way, saying people are apathetic. If we let the voters vote, they seem to be apathetic about these things. They're not aware of the roles of these things. I was concerned that testimonies put in 85% of the people want this, but I never heard any source where this 85% number came from. And based on some of the discussion here, you would think that having any appointments is undemocratic, the way it was discussed. And we have a lot of appointment processes. Are we going to have a constitutional amendment to change all appointments based on some of the arguments presented? I don't believe democracy is threatened by the appointment process, and I would like to see the existing process continue and be improved by Senate Bill 171. Thank you.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Lang? You're leaving again. Okay. Senator Carrozza, you look like you're.
Actually, it's, I didn't know if the bill sponsor could answer a quick question for me.
Okay. Senator Kagan, you want to come back up here and field a question from Senator Carrozza?
Yes, Senator Carrozza.
Thank you. I just want to better understand, is the reason this would be put on the ballot as a constitutional amendment is the fact that we passed it 3 times on the Senate side and it's not moving on the House side?
No, this would modify how we do our elections, and that's why we would be changing the Constitution, so constitutional changes have to go through the voters.
Okay, so that I just wanted the clarification. Yeah. So, and did you say we passed this now 3 times in the Senate?
Yes, I think that Senator Lamb passed it once, and then I passed it, and just for the record, Delegate Foley is the House sponsor, and she was the chair of the Democratic Central Committee, and she was appointed, and she believes strongly in elections.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you, Senator Carrozza.
Okay. Yeah.
One
yes.
more
Okay. Let's not get too many. Senator Washington.
No, it's just because I haven't thought deeply about this. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So the Central Committees make a recommendation, though. Isn't that correct? And then it's ultimately the governor that does.
Correct.
Right. And so the governor is elected, by everybody. I'm just kind of getting also the theory that essentially representative democracy. So that's been the argument that the Central Committee people are making a recommendation. So there's sort of and it's up to the governor to actually accept or reject that. And so I was wondering, what would be your response to that?
Almost never does the governor reject the Central Committee. That's a double negative, I'm sure. But the governor generally just always rubber stamps and appoints. So it's not actually a very open and democratic process. I'm aware of one situation when the Central Committee, I think, sent up 2 names and the governor picked. But in general, it's 1 name and the governor appoints that person.
Okay. Actually, now I do have another question. It has been argued to me that the title of the bill is actually misleading because the Central Committee is still doing an appointment. It's just if it happens in the first 2 years,
correct,
they got to be on. So it's not like, all due respect to my former constituent, Ms. Smith, it's not like Virginia where vacancy, special election. This is, as you say, a bit of a middle ground. So do you think that by entitling the bill special elections that it's suggesting that this is more the Virginia model or the 28 other states which does not have it quite like this bill does? I just put it out there for some consideration.
So, Mr. Chair, as you know, we don't write our bills, we don't write the titles or the purpose paragraphs. I think it's accurate in that it does create special elections, but it is just a component of it. It's just a portion of it, not forever and always. And that is the middle ground. And as we often say, perfect is the enemy of the good. In answer to Mr. Lang's question, the 85% was a Gonzalez poll quoted in the Common Cause testimony, which is publicly available.
Okay. Any additional questions for the witnesses? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 2. It's not Senate Bill 1 like we had last year, but Senate Bill 2. And we're going to go to Senate Bill 27. Senator Kagan, Election Law, Campaign Finance, Exploratory Committees. And I do have Morgan Drayton and Nikki Tyree signed up as panelists. And again, we're on Senate Bill 27. And they want to come up here?
Yep, come on, guys. Where's Morgan?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, for the
Yes.
record, Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. And once again, this is a bill that we've seen before. But it's narrower. It's even less controversial than when we passed it unanimously. So draft campaign committees are no longer in there. This is exploratory committees only. Senator Tarr is thinking about running for governor, so she sets up an exploratory committee to run for governor. And bottom line is today, she can spend money on anything and not disclose it. So this is familiar to the rest of the committee. But this committee puts some guardrails in as to what money can be spent on, and it has to be spent just on campaign activities. It speaks to the dissolution if she decides to run or decides not to run. It speaks to that. And it makes clear that there are no limits for the amount of money she can raise. That's a court decision. And it does transparency so that there is accountability and people know where her money came from. The purposes for which money can be spent are included in the bill. And it's polls, direct mail, hiring staff, creating a website, renting space, doing digital ads, leasing office space, I said, and purchasing electronic equipment like computers. So it's really narrow as to what would actually be used for a campaign. Again, this bill passed unanimously, and it is even less controversial this year because we took out draft committee, which the House found a little confusing. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, and I hope that we can move this forward and get this done this year.
Okay, why don't we take Ms. Tyree's testimony, and I think our other witness that I called in the back. Okay, why don't you proceed? You've got 2.5 minutes signed up favorable.
Morgan.
Is it Morgan Drayton? We're on the Senate Bill 27, so if you want to come up to the table. Okay, Ms. Tyree, why don't you proceed?
Thank you, Chair Feldman. Just again, for the record, Nikki Tyree, Executive Director for the League of Women Voters of Maryland. Many of you have heard me talk about this bill a few times in the last couple of years. But one thing that we haven't spoken about is how this is really an equity issue. This would level the playing field for people who are coming in to run for the first time. Let's say that Morgan decides to run for office and she asks me, an ultramillionaire, to form an exploratory committee for her. I can pump money into this exploratory committee, and as all of us are aware, a lot of times races can be decided just from name recognition. So if I can fill people's inboxes or social media or homes with Morgan's name over and over and over again, then I'm hedging my bets, right? This would also put some transparency around who is giving to these exploratory committees, as well as how much they're giving. If we know that Morgan is getting millions of dollars into an exploratory committee, while maybe Senator Kagan is only getting a couple of thousand, then I think that, we can see where things are unfair, and we need to see that transparency. Voters deserve to have that right. So I would urge a favorable report, and I can answer any questions.
Okay, let's go to Ms. Drayton. Why don't you weigh in here on Senate Bill 27, and then we'll take questions, okay?
Good afternoon again. For the record, Morgan Drayton, apologies for my voice. Common Cause Maryland is in strong support of this bill. Again, want to stress the transparency. It's critically important that the public be able to track where this money is coming from and who's funding these races. I don't want to repeat what Nikki said, so I'll just say that Common Cause is in strong support of this bill, and we would urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor or two witnesses? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Okay, we'll go to Mr. Lang. You're here in opposition, unfavorable. Mr. Lang, it's Mr. Lang Day. Sort of. Okay, put the mic in front of you, and you've got 2.5 minutes signed up unfavorable.
Mr. Chairman and fellow senators, I'm Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. I agree with most of this bill. My one problem is with what to do with the funding if the exploratory bill, the committee should cease. Right now, it's open to like several choices. I believe that it should be made mandatory that those who contributed to the exploratory committee should be offered the money first rather than have it default to a central committee or to a charity. I think that would give better support and limit the possibility or make it harder that the exploratory committee might be able to, if I understand it correctly, there's no limitation on the amount of donations, and then that this could be an exploratory committee, not really sort of half-hearted, and you get the money, decide not to run, that this could be a de facto money raiser for central committees as opposed, and get around some of the donation rules. So that's my concern with the bill, is primarily that it should be changed. Maybe I should have done favorable with amendment, but should be changed on how that the ones who contributed the money should get their pro rata share, or at least offered it first before it would go to the central committee or to any of the other groups that are listed in the bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lang? Okay, seeing, yes?
Mr. Chair, I can just say that Mr. Lang seems not to be aware of this language being identical to wrapping up any of our campaign committees. So when County Executive Kevin Kamenetz, who was running for governor, unexpectedly died, we strengthened it, but this was the list, and this is common. It's been law for many, many years.
Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 27. We're going to next move to Senate Bill 88. Senator Kagan, we've got, I'm going to call up your panel. We've got Justin Fiore from MML, Maryland Municipal League, Lucas Roca, and Jared Demarinis. Mr. Demarinis still here?
Yep.
Okay, that's your panel.
It is.
And you take the time you need to present Senate Bill 88.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. This is not a bill you've seen before. It's a really modest bill, and it's a bit of a kumbaya piece of legislation. Our former superintendent of elections, and I will not use her name, but took a lot of liberties with our laws. And she used to do things that, frankly, were not legal. And so Mr. Demarinis, who is scrupulously detail-oriented, wanted to make sure that the capacity to assist our 157 cities and towns with their elections was going to be absolutely legal. So we had several conversations and negotiation session. I felt a little bit like Henrietta Kissinger here, and making sure that the State Board of Elections and the Maryland Municipal League thought that this was a reasonable bill that would allow the State Board of Elections to provide some assistance or support to our cities and towns. To be clear, this is an emergency bill, and the reason for that is because every month, there is another local election. And so we really want to make sure that the support and assistance can be legalized as soon as possible. I think there's one in February and two in, Justin will do it, and 5 in May and blah, blah, blah. They come pretty quickly. And so we really want to make sure that this moves fast and becomes law fast. So with that, I invited one of my interns, Lucas Roca, to have the experience of testifying. And so he's going to be very brief, but he's going to say why he thinks this is a good bill. And then we'll go to our...
Okay, Lucas, put the mic close up, and then you've got 2.5 minutes, okay, to weigh in.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. My name is Lucas Roca, and as Vice Chair Kagan said, I'm one of her legislative interns, and I'm here as a proponent on SB 88. This initiative aims to strengthen the overall electoral framework in Maryland by ensuring that all municipalities, regardless of size or resources, can conduct elections that meet consistent standards of fairness and accuracy. When the state can't help any of its 157 cities or towns, it can create errors. And it can cause errors, it can decrease the number of poll areas for residents, and it can also decrease the number of voters for particular districts. With SB 88, local governments that struggle to meet the demands of election administration will benefit from the collaboration outlined in this bill. It can lead to cost savings, better trained staff, and most importantly, a better experience for voters. So for the sake of upholding democracy, protecting voter rights, and ensuring every election is fair and efficient, I strongly urge a favorable report on SB 88. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Ms. Fiore, you're up next. 2.5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in strong support of Senate Bill 88. As the Vice Chair mentioned, this is consensus language. It's a really simple bill. It just allows us to work with the state in a really defined way. So we mentioned this is emergency legislation, and the reason for that really is because we do have municipal elections happening year-round. We've got one in this month, 4 in March, 11 in April, and 55 municipal elections this May. So it's really important for them in preparation to have the consistency, to know that they'll have the support of the state or their local board of elections as they prepare for those, make sure residents have good, free, fair elections. For those reasons, we urge a favorable report.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Demarinis?
Sure. Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections. Yes, I support this bill. It basically just allows the state administrator to enter in MOUs with the municipalities. This just kind of protects the state, its equipment, and just defines the roles. Currently, we supply the voter registration lists to the municipalities to them. But this now allows us the ability to have, they can, with more support for all mail elections or the use of our equipment as well, and just making sure that the costs then are, back to the municipalities for their own elections there. So on that front, yes.
Okay, we'll take questions. Senator Augustine's going to lead off.
Thank you, Chair Feldman. Yeah, I very much support this bill with my 9 municipalities. Many of them are very small, so it just would be very helpful. The thing that you were starting to hit on, though, something that I was wondering about, like, how are you going to manage, like, the needs of, my 9 all very, very different in their needs, for help and assistance, and then also just, how do you contemplate that?
So it's basically just, this is helping us codify like past practices. So municipalities have been reaching out to us, to the state board in the past, and in various degrees, right? Like some they ask for equipment, some don't ask for anything, some just ask for a list. So at this point here, it just allows me to, the ones that need equipment, the ones that want to do an all-mail election, that we can do this in a legal manner here and define roles, like so that they understand in a document what their expectations are getting from the state board, from the county board, and what their role is in conducting their own elections. Because these are municipal elections, they're the ones that are in charge of it. We're just kind of almost like a vendor in a sense, supplying them. So for your 9 there, it's, whatever their services currently, most of them usually just ask for a list of registration, and then they go out and produce their own little ballots and put it in a box, and then you have the city of Rockville, for example, that does an all-mail election where we then use our vendor and help supply them with the list and go forward with it, and other cities as well that might be a little bit more I'd say expansive in what they need. So we take our cue from them, and and then also to the timing. Sometimes we don't support, or we just provide the list because they run the election on the same day as election day, and we're not going to lend out any equipment. We're like, right, you're just not going to get that. You get a list, and then you're running your own election.
That's very helpful, and that, like I said, it's obviously already helpful. Hopefully, it expands the amount of help that you're able to provide to our municipalities. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions of this panel? Okay, seeing none, we do have one additional witness signed favorable. Adam Rybczynski from City of Havre de Grace is. Sir, why don't you come on up here? You're going to be the final witness on this. You signed up straight favorable. You'll be on the 2.5-minute clock.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Adam Rybczynski with the City of Havre de Grace. We support this bill. Historically, the City of Havre de Grace has relied on the support services of the Harford County Board of Elections to provide both equipment and voters list. Our election is in May, So right now, we're kind of at a point where we don't know if we need to purchase election equipment or if this bill will pass. So we are asking for a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 88. We're going to next go to Senator Muse. Senator Muse in the House. I think you saw him walk in, hiding behind that podium. Okay, Senator Muse, we're on Senate Bill 18, and you are the only witness. Well, we've got Mr. Lang has switched his testimony from unfavorable to favorable, so and you're the only other witness. So if you want to come up here and do a kumbaya with Senator Muse, that would be very efficient here.
Come on, my buddy.
Okay.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
I hope you're having a good day, and always say, if not, well, there's always tomorrow, and it'll be better, right? Chairman Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of EEE, for the record, I'm C. Anthony Muse, Legislative District 26. Senate Bill 18 is something that many people in my area have asked for, especially workers at the polls. Senate Bill 18 proposes reducing Maryland's early voting period from 8 to 5 days. As you know, Maryland implemented early voting in 2010 to provide greater flexibility for voters who may not be able to cast their ballots on Election Day. The goal was to increase participation by offering additional opportunities to vote, recognizing that rigid Election Day only voting could be a barrier to some. Since then, Maryland has expanded early voting and more recently introduced no-excuse mail-in voting, which has significantly changed voter behavior. As all of you know, as of 2024, Maryland operated 87 Maryland voting centers statewide, with 11 in Prince George's County. And as we know, running these sites requires significant financial commitment. Election judges are mandated by law to receive compensation. Chief judges $250 a day, election judges $200 a day, training compensation $50. Therefore, with multiple judges per site, combined with costs for equipment security and administrative support, the state spends millions annually on early voting operations. Each additional day of early voting increases these, but because of the pandemic, and hear me on this, because of the pandemic, we have shifted the way people vote and have seen a huge growth of mail-in ballots. In fact, the expansion of mail-in voting has fundamentally changed how Maryland votes, and data from recent elections shows a clear trend toward increased mail-in voting. While early voting participation has remained steady or declined in comparison. Maryland voter turnout by voter method, for example, in year 2024, 989,000 statewide voted early voting. On Election Day, 1,149,000. Mail-in ballots were 75,058, 59 rather. In 2020, early voting was 731,282, and for Election Day, 1,074,067, et cetera, et cetera. In 2020, mail-in ballots surpassed early voting for the first time, driven by pandemic-related expansions. In 2022, even with fewer COVID-related restrictions, Maryland the mail-in ballots still doubled from 2018 levels. In 2024, mail-in ballots remained a popular option, with 752,589 votes cast this way. Now, this term confirms that many voters are opting for mail-in voting as a convenient alternative to in-person early voting, while Election Day remains the most common method of voting early voting and mail-in ballots. Given this shift toward mail-in ballots, Maryland has an opportunity to reduce costs while remaining voter accessible. Reducing early voting from 8 to 5 days would, number one, generate cost savings by reducing the number of operational days. Maryland would save millions in election judge pay, site rental costs, etc. Number two, reflect voter preferences with mail-in ballots now an established and widely used option. Again, because of COVID and people just got in the habit of that, fewer voters rely solely on early voting. Number three, maintaining accessibility. Reducing early voting by 3 days still leaves 5 days of early voting with mail-in and election day. So I believe that Senate Bill 18 aligns Maryland voting system with voter behavior while promoting fiscal responsibility. The increase in mail-in voting has reduced the need for extended early voting period. A 5-day early voting window combined with mail-in and election day voting preserves accessibility while cutting unnecessary expenses. It would allow Maryland the ability to adapt its election procedures to balance voting convenience and cost efficiency. Reducing early voting by 3 days is a logical, data-driven step that allows the state to save more money. And if I can, in terms of those of us who run and our workers, it becomes in terms of help at the polls. Our people are worn out after standing out there for 8 days. You only have so many who are going to do it anyway. It's hot, and it involves a lot, and it takes its toll on candidates who have already campaigned, for months and months. So I think both from the perspective of the public in general, and both from the changing trends that we have seen and are data driven, then I think that I would urge a favorable report on this bill.
Okay, why don't we take some questions? Any questions for Senator Muse? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Lang, we'll take your favorable testimony. We'll take questions.
Mr. Chairman, fellow senators, Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. I know I did screw up and put unfavorable. I guess I got it, had so many in a row. Even though I submitted favorable testimony, I listed it as unfavorable on the MyMGA. Anyhow, I also sent in testimony favoring the prior bill that we just had. I support reducing it from 8 to 5, and you already talked about the savings, but also it would give the election board more time to prepare for the one-day primary or the one-day election day that's going to follow instead of the few days that they have. And from my perspective, I've been a judge and did the 4 days. There are a lot of people my age there, and 4 days was really hard. So instead of having 2 crews working 4 days, perhaps they could get just one crew of 2 or one crew of 3 and break up the workload and make it easier to find judges to support the early voting. So, and I guess my only concern in my testimony I put in there was no fiscal information. It seems like 2 days before when I'm preparing testimony, I don't see the fiscal information there. And then when I come here, I see that my testimony has now been, some of the things I put are no longer valid. So I guess it's very hard for them to keep up with all the bills you guys are creating. But anyhow,
Stacy Goodman just said the answer to that is absolutely, that's a very correct statement. So it's our committee analyst, TLS, right?
Yeah, so I don't envy their job. But anyhow, I think this is a great idea. It'll save the state money, and I urge a favorable report.
Okay, questions? Senator Carrozza.
I just want to make sure, because I've been flipping through the testimony of others, I want to just make sure I understand the bill, Senator, as the sponsor. So all this bill does is reduces the number of days from
8 to 5.
From 8 to 5.
That's it.
Okay, and it doesn't affect any mail-in?
No. In fact, that's growing, and that seems to be the trend.
So that's all this bill does?
That's all it
does.
Okay,
just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
And if I may say, Mr. Chairman, MACO mistakenly submitted opposition testimony, but they've since withdrawn it. And of course, my friends at Common Cause referred to the 2000, they wrote their testimony based on the 2020 election results, which again was totally unusual because of COVID. And again, I say the trend is moving towards mail-in ballot. And when we first started early voting in 2020, et cetera, it has changed tremendously, and that seems to be the convenient change. That's correct. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Additional questions? Okay. Seeing none, that concludes bill hearing.
Thank you all very
on
much.
Senate Bill 18. We're going to next move to Senator Kramer.
Thank you.
Ben, why don't you come up here? Senate Bill 93, Senator Ben Kramer from the 19th District, Montgomery County. Senator, you are the lone witness. We do have Mr. Lang signed up unfavorable, but it's only the two of you. It's going to be like Ali Frazier here.
Mr. Chair.
So Senator Kramer, you lead off.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Ben Kramer to introduce Senate Bill 93 all by my lonesome here. But I don't think it'll be necessary, committee, to bring in a cast of thousands because this is a bill that passed the General Assembly overwhelmingly in 2021. And colleagues, the legislation before you was implemented in 2021 because this legislature knew the value of giving every one of our residents in this state every opportunity to participate in our great democracy by providing them every opportunity to vote. The bill originally came in with the goal and hope of sending every one of our registered voters a ballot to vote. The bill changed significantly in both committees, in both chambers. And Delegate Janelle Wilkins had the bill in the House, and she has it again this year. But the bill was changed so that rather than actually sending a ballot to the registered voters, they would receive an application for a ballot. And this was an effort to ensure that everybody has an opportunity, those who are very busy, those with disabilities, those of our seniors who find it difficult to vote in person. And so starting with the 2022 primary, registered voters were sent an application to receive a vote by mail ballot. It has worked overwhelmingly, colleagues. The numbers of voters, as you just heard the good Senator Muse mention, are starting to trend towards vote by mail. Now, my preference would still be for us to be sending to registered voters a ballot and keep driving the opportunity to vote by mail. Now, what happened in 2021 is that the two chambers changed the bill to limit it to 2022 and 2024 elections just to see if, in fact, it would be successful. And again, colleagues, it has been overwhelmingly successful. So I am back before you this session to continue doing what we have in practice now in the last two election cycles, so that we continue to ensure that every one of our registered voters has the best opportunity to participate in our great democracy, receive a ballot if they choose to do so. The other advantage with this process is that when they do receive that application, they have the opportunity to sign up to receive their ballots in perpetuity, if they choose to do so, by mail. And that has been a huge plus as to how this has been working. So with that, colleagues, I certainly welcome any questions. And my goal is to see to it that we continue down a road with a process that has been working overwhelmingly well. So with that, thank you very much. And certainly if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take a shot.
Questions for Senator Kramer? Okay, seeing none, thank you, sir. We're going to bring up our one lone unfavorable witness, Mr. Lang, Alan Lang. Sir, you're going to have 2.5 minutes to give your unfavorable testimony.
Hopefully you made the same mistake he did on the last one.
No, I made a different mistake. Mr. Chair, fellow senators, my name's Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. First want you to disregard my written testimony because I misread the bill and thought it was ballots and not applications. So I changed and I now have my oral testimony. So I'm concerned that the absentee ballot applications that will be sent to every registered voter, whether wanted or not. For many of us who want to vote in person, I believe this is a waste of taxpayer money. And looking at the fiscal report, last year the cost was about $1 million to send it to everyone. Now it's risen to 1.2 and $1.3 million. I also believe that sending the ballots to those who don't want them or as a risk because I believe the registration rolls in all the counties have errors in them. They have people who have died, they have people who have moved, people have errors in their actual address, like missing apartment numbers. So others couldn't receive these applications or they will be undeliverable. My concern is what happens to these applications. What would prevent someone besides the intended voter from using the forms to request a ballot? From what I see in the ballot, all you need to know is their name, their address, and their birth date. People can get into your bank accounts, get in your credit card information when they need much more information than just your birthday. So once they do that, are they going to keep other people from legitimately voting by asking for a ballot that was not intended for them? We have no signature verification to match these requests when the ballots come in. So you don't know that people who've gotten these ballots by doing a voter ID or personal information have gotten it through spoofing that stuff. So then as in the 2020 election, I was a provisional judge, and there were numerous people who claimed they never requested an absentee ballot, but they couldn't vote because the record said that they had, or people had voted in their name, and they said they never voted. So there's some risks out there. So consider these risks before you decide to vote for this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lane. Any questions for the witness, Senator Carrozza?
Actually, Mr. Chair, my question was an informational one for Administrator Demarinis regarding the...
Jared, why don't you come up here, if you don't mind. Okay, Senator Carrozza.
I was just referring to the information sheet from the Maryland Association of Election Officials, and given your close coordination working with the election officials at the local level, could you expand on this information sheet?
Well, one, just wanted to let everyone know, Aaron Perrone, the current president of the Mayo, is in the audience, but Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections. I think that we've had now 2 elections where we've mailed out notices, applications to all the eligible registered voters. We've seen significant increases in mail-in voting in the primary elections, particularly because of the date, where in the 2024 election, it was close to 40% of voters voted by mail in that scenario there. As for this bill in and of itself with the notice, the state board we do the mailing for the applications and sending it out with our vendor to everyone moving forward with it 60 days beforehand. We recommend making some modifications to it to include, making sure that it's 60 days for eligible voters for the primary election rather than all the voters at the primary election.
I'm sorry, I might not have been clear. I was really trying to better understand the impact for the local elected officials, given the information that was shared in the information sheet.
I guess the thing is, at one point here, as the applications come back, 60 days before the election, they do have to process those in a timely manner to then produce those ballots. There is an impact upon them for that as well.
So the statement where it's talking about SB 93 will require local boards to either usurp time during an election cycle that is dedicated to other office operations in order to mail out applications or to require them to finance the mailings through a vendor. I have not had the opportunity to talk directly to my 3 local election officials about this, but I was just trying to have a better understanding of.
Well, I mean, there's a cost associated with this and time, which is, the 60-day window, right? We do mail them out, and as they come in, we do expect a higher volume of return at that point there as well.
Okay.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 93, which brings us to our final bill of the day. Senator Ellis can come up here on Senate Bill 66. Senator, there 3 witnesses have signed up in person. Do you mind if I just bring, they're all sort of on your side of the bill. So I'm going to, Alan Lang. Mr. Lang, you're signed up favorable on this bill. Gloria Dent and Sharon Maniki. Is Sharon here? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have those 3 folks come up here, and then this will be the final panel of the day and the final bill of the day. And Ms. Maniki comes up here and she has a seat. You can start. Senator Ellis. Okay, Senator Ellis, why don't you proceed with Senate Bill 66?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Senator Arthur Ellis, representing District 28, Charles County, to present Senate Bill 66. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee, this bill will improve access to voting by creating a training program for election staff, creating guidelines to improve accommodations, and collect feedback from voters to improve the guidelines and accommodations for voters. We made an amendment to the bill, which we sent in. Each elderly voter and voter with disabilities shall be provided an option to use the accommodations and the expedited voting process. Some folks wrote our office saying, hey, we want that option. We don't want us to be mandated. So what's the reason for this bill? Last election, general election, long lines, disabled voters showed up, elderly. They were like, hey, can we have some accommodations? We worked with the individuals, election judges. It's like, oh, well, we don't have any accommodations for them. They have to wait in line like everyone else. And like, you are kidding me. Americans with Disability Act require all aspects of community to offer accommodations to individuals who needs it. Senior citizens, people with disabilities. And we're like, oh, we have to do something about this. I did further research. The bill drafters drafted this bill, saw nothing in code requiring accommodations. And I just want to say that it's really unacceptable to have so many of our voters disenfranchised. I mean, what I saw this past November out at the different locations was very much unacceptable. I just want to say in the bill folder, I looked, we have 24 favorable letters for this bill, 24 favorable letters, 0 unfavorable. Organizations like AARP, Maryland Catholic Conference, the Evangelical Lutheran Synod, National Federation of the Blind, the ARC, Down Syndrome Coalition, on and on, all saying, hey, this is needed. They're saying it's needed because, believe me, it is. You know, some jurisdictions are more progressive or law-abiding than others in that they offer accommodations. Some jurisdictions don't, like mine in Charles County. Why should we leave it up to each jurisdiction to decide whether they will obey the law, federal law? We as a state can reinforce that we support accommodations for the less fortunate who have a disability or those who are very fortunate to live a very long time on this earth. We can't tell them, well, why don't you just go and vote? We heard this comment. Why didn't you do a mail-in vote? Why didn't you? That's unacceptable. They should have a choice to vote the way they want to vote and not to be insulted by election workers, anybody else telling them that, you know, please go away, you're not needed here. Some of these organizations that talks about the need for this bill give detailed reasons why from their perspective, and I won't go through all of them. One of my favorite is Maryland Independent Living Network. They try to have people to live independently and to be involved in our society, to be able to have access to the most basic requirements of our democracy, and that is the right to vote. You know, I would hate to get to the age where I need accommodations because of my age, and I'm told that, hey, you know, we will not be able to assist you. It was just really unacceptable. An example of the current state of accessibility, this is from the Maryland Independent Living Network, talks about, and it's in your bill folder, an individual with a disability that uses a power chair reports that increased participation in voting has increased convenience for most voters, but has the opposite effect for those who benefit most from accessibility. Increased voter participation at polling places create crowds at voting locations, which creates additional difficulties for power chair users to navigate the polling place. It is common to go to a voting station and not find any wheelchair accessible parking, as the current number of wheelchair accessible parking is insufficient for the number of individuals that go to polling places during early voting election day, often leaving people with disabilities waiting for 20 minutes or longer before they're even able to enter the location. Once inside a polling location, weaving in and out of crowds to get to the check-in desk is stressful. More stress is added when having to participate in the voting process in this way. It becomes more of an inconvenience than a privilege. Availability and access to dedicated persons or teams who are knowledgeable about accommodations for people with disabilities and older citizens would create ease during the voting process. And so a lot of the testimonies submitted have details like that. And these are from very reputable organizations who represent so many of our senior citizens and disabled individuals. And, you know, we go to airports and we go different public places and you see a sign. If you see something, say something. Well, I saw something and I was disgusted with it. And I'm saying something here in my official capacity as a duly elected member of this body. And therefore, I urge a favorable report, colleagues, on Senate Bill 0066.
Okay, thank you, Senator Ellis. Let's go to our two witnesses next. Sharon Maniki, we're going to take your testimony, and you guys will be on the 2.5-minute clock, both of you, and Mr. Lang. So, Sharon, why don't you begin your testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Sharon Maneki. I'm Legislative Director for the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland. Senator Ellis, we want to thank you for introducing this bill. It's a good bill, but I think that the amended amendment that we suggested to you will make it a great bill. The Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990. It's 35 years old coming up. And this bill has a provision that the person decides whether he or she wants a reasonable accommodation. And so we just think that it's appropriate, and people should be given the choice. They come out to vote, they're glad to vote, and we just want them to either use the provision or wait in the line, or whatever it happens to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lang, you're going to be our final witness of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, fellow senators. I support this bill. Based on the bill, I meet the definition of elderly, but thankfully not the definition of being disabled. However, right after the election in November, I had my mobility restricted temporarily from a broken foot and a very sore back. If I'd had them at the time of the election, I would have had a very difficult time standing in line, and then once I checked in, standing to wait my turn to do the voting. So I think it would have been, this bill would, having a chance for those of us with mobility issues to have a chance to sit down while we wait our turn to check in, and then to sit while we wait our turn to use the voting machinery is a great idea and should be adopted. I also believe this bill is superior to House Bill 317, which is curbside voting, which had a hearing in the House yesterday and I believe passed last year. The House bill has technology and security issues. This bill has a much simpler approach to let the elderly and disabled vote inside like everyone else. So assuming the boards have the logistics and funding to make the changes required by the bill, please enter a favorable report for Senate Bill 66.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lang. I just want to be clear, Gloria Dent, I had called her earlier. She's not here. Ms. Dent here. Going once, twice, three times. Okay, questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 66, and that concludes our work for today. Thank you. So, hereby adjourned.